They say every workplace has its secrets, but I never expected mine to start with a single email. If you've ever had a day at work spiral out of control, make sure to stick with me through this story, and tell me at the end if you think I handled it right. I work at a mid-sized consulting firm in Denver. My role is managing client accounts, balancing deadlines, and keeping our team of 5 on track. The key players in this story are my colleague Jake, a smooth talker with a habit of volunteering for projects he barely finishes, and our manager Linda, who's tough but usually fair. One Tuesday morning, I opened my inbox to find a message that didn't seem meant for me. It was from a vendor we often work with, and the subject line read, "Final confirmation of payment, thanks, Jake." My stomach sank because I handle all vendor billing, and I knew no such payment had ever been approved. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. But as I scrolled down and read the details, I realized this wasn't just a small oversight. It looked like someone inside our office had authorized a $5,000 transfer without me. And the worst part? The vendor seemed to think I was the one who signed off on it. I decided not to reply immediately, but instead, I printed the email and slid it into my desk drawer. Because deep down, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. The rest of that morning, I couldn't shake the email from my head. I kept glancing at Jake across the office. He was leaning back in his chair, laughing with another coworker, like he didn't have a care in the world. But now, every laugh felt suspicious. Around noon, Linda called our team into her office. She announced we'd been given a new client project, something high budget, high pressure, and oddly rushed. The strange part was that Jake was suddenly the lead coordinator. Normally, Linda trusted me to oversee large accounts because I was detail-oriented. But this time, she said Jake had already volunteered and the client specifically asked for him. That made no sense. The client was a regional tech startup that I'd built the relationship with personally. Why would they bypass me and go directly to Jake? I tried to stay professional, nodding along as Linda outlined the deadlines, but my mind was racing. Between the mystery payment email and Jake's sudden promotion to project lead, something didn't add up. Later that day, I checked our shared project folders. To my shock, there were already proposals uploaded under Jake's name, as if he'd been working on this account for weeks, even though Linda had just introduced it to us. That was the moment I realized Jake wasn't just cutting corners. He was building something behind the scenes. But what I didn't know yet was how deeply it would drag me into the mess. By the following morning, the office felt different. People were whispering near the break room, pausing their conversations when I walked by. At first, I brushed it off, but then I caught fragments, my name mixed with Jake's, and words like deal, bonus, and backdoor. I grabbed a coffee and pretended not to notice, but my chest was tight. Something was being said about me, and it wasn't good. When I returned to my desk, I saw Jake chatting with Linda in her office. She was smiling, nodding, even laughing at something he said. Meanwhile, I was left out of the loop entirely. During lunch, one of my closest co-workers, Sarah, quietly pulled me aside. She hesitated, glanced around, and whispered, "Look, people think you're involved with Jake. They think you're working with him on some side arrangement with the vendors." My jaw nearly hit the floor. I told her I had nothing to do with it, but she just shrugged. "I know. But Jake's been talking. And the way he framed it, it sounds like you're in on it." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Not only was Jake cutting me out of projects, he was dragging my reputation down with him. That's when I decided I couldn't just wait around. I needed proof of what he was doing. And my first lead came from the most unexpected place. That same afternoon, I logged into our accounting system to double-check recent transactions. Normally, every payment is routed through me and approved by Linda. But as I scrolled through the vendor ledger, something stood out like a flashing red light. A large budget allocation, $10,000, was gone. The expense line was vague, labeled simply as consulting services. The date matched the one from the suspicious vendor email I had tucked away in my drawer. My hands actually trembled on the keyboard. This wasn't a small clerical error. Money had been moved without proper authorization, and the digital signature on the approval line looked eerily close to mine. Not identical, but close enough that someone unfamiliar with my style would think it was me. I checked the file history and saw that Jake's user account had been active in the system late at night, hours after the rest of us had logged off. The system didn't show what exactly he did, just that he had accessed restricted folders. The worst part? If Linda saw these numbers before I spoke up, she might assume I was the one pulling strings. After all, on paper, I was the person responsible for vendor billing. I realized I had a narrow window to protect myself. But to do that, I'd need to catch Jake in the act. And the opening came sooner than I expected. The next morning, I was pouring coffee in the break room when I overheard Jake bragging to another coworker. He spoke in that cocky, too loud tone he always used when he wanted to be noticed. "Big payouts mean big recognition," he said, smirking. "Some people handle the busy work, but I make the real moves." It was subtle, but his eyes flicked toward me as he said it. My stomach dropped. It felt like he was daring me to react, like he wanted me to confront him so he could twist the story further. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I went back to my desk and typed a quiet note to myself: "Jake is leaving breadcrumbs on purpose. He wasn't just covering his tracks, he was setting me up to take the fall." Later that day, Linda sent an all-team email praising Jake for fast-tracking client approvals. My name wasn't mentioned once, even though I was the one who usually handled every step of that process. It was official, my credibility was being chipped away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Jake's smirk, his tone, and the way the office whispers were growing louder by the day. I knew I had to push back. But how do you fight someone who's rewriting the narrative in real time? What would you have done in my shoes at this point? 2 days later, I had a scheduled call with the tech startup client, the one Jake had mysteriously taken over. Normally, these calls were routine, progress updates, clarifying deliverables, confirming timelines. But this time, the tone was off from the very beginning. The client's director, a sharp guy named Marcus, sounded almost impatient. "Look," he said, "I just want to make sure we're clear about the bonus arrangement." Jake assured us it was approved. I froze. "Bonus arrangement?" I asked carefully. "Yes," Marcus replied. "The additional 5% on top of our retainer. Jake said you personally authorized it as a goodwill gesture for moving fast." My heart sank. Not only had I never approved such a thing, I didn't even have the authority to promise it. Only Linda could sign off on new financial terms. I kept my voice steady and told Marcus I'd double-check everything internally. He agreed, but the hesitation in his voice made it clear he already sensed disorganization on our end. Clients hate that. The call ended, and I just sat there staring at my screen. If this escalated, it wouldn't just ruin my reputation, it could damage the firm's relationship with a high-paying client. Jake wasn't just bending rules anymore. He was dragging the company itself into his scheme. And then, by pure accident, I stumbled on something that changed the game entirely. That Friday, I stayed late at the office, hoping the quiet would help me piece everything together. Around 7 p.m., I got up to refill my water bottle, and that's when I heard voices coming from Linda's office. Her door was slightly ajar, and I froze when I recognized them, Linda and Jake. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words carried into the hallway. Jake's voice was low but urgent. "Once the second transfer clears, nobody will question it. They'll assume it was standard procedure." Linda's reply made my blood run cold. "And you're sure the paperwork looks like it came from her account?" Her. They were talking about me. I gripped the water bottle so hard it nearly cracked. Linda wasn't being duped, she was in on it. The missing money, the client bonus, the sudden shift in projects, it all connected. My own manager was orchestrating this mess with Jake, and I was the perfect scapegoat. I stepped back before they could notice me, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. In that moment, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I needed solid proof. And fate handed me the first piece sooner than I ever could have planned. The following Monday, I arrived early, determined to comb through every digital trail I could find. While clearing out my inbox, I noticed something odd, a new email thread from Jake, but it looked like he had accidentally copied me on it. The subject line read, "Updated invoice, use this version." Attached was a PDF, supposedly from the vendor. At first glance, it looked normal, but when I compared it to the official invoice on file, the differences were glaring. The vendor's logo was slightly stretched, and the formatting had telltale errors, like it had been hastily edited in a word processor. But the kicker? The signature block at the bottom carried my name. Not just my name typed out, but a digital signature Jake must have copied from old documents. It was crude but convincing enough to fool someone skimming quickly. I sat back in my chair, pulse racing. This was it. The smoking gun. Proof that someone, almost certainly Jake, was forging documents and tying them to me. I didn't forward the file right away. Instead, I saved a copy to an external drive, making sure I had my own evidence in case the email mysteriously disappeared. It was the first real leverage I had in this entire mess. But it also meant the stakes had just skyrocketed. If you were me, would you take this straight to HR, or wait and gather more? That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, replaying every detail of the last 2 weeks. The bogus invoices, the client bonus, the late-night system access, the whispers in the office, it all formed a pattern once I laid it out. Jake wasn't freelancing this scheme. He was feeding Linda doctored paperwork, making her think I was behind the approvals. She, in turn, was signing off under the belief that I had already cleared everything. By the time the money was transferred, the digital trail pointed to me, while Jake walked away clean. But there was one hole in their plan: the timestamps. The forged invoice in my inbox was created hours before Linda supposedly approved it. If I could show the mismatch, it would prove someone else had staged the paperwork. I started compiling a private file, screenshots of access logs, copies of emails, even phone records showing Jake's late-night logins. The picture that emerged was undeniable. They were working together, but they weren't nearly as airtight as they thought. The challenge was timing. If I accused them too soon, they'd spin it as paranoia. If I waited too long, the next transfer might push this scheme past the point of no return. And then I realized, the upcoming client review meeting might be the perfect stage to expose everything. The client review meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. It was supposed to be a standard check-in with Marcus and his team, but I knew it could become so much more. I spent the 2 days leading up to it rehearsing every angle, what to say, when to say it, and how to drop the evidence without tipping my hand too soon. When the meeting started, Linda kicked things off with her usual polished tone, thanking Marcus for his partnership. Jake sat beside her, grinning like he owned the room. I could barely concentrate on the introductions, my heart pounding in my ears. Marcus raised a point almost immediately. About that additional 5% arrangement, we're still not seeing it reflected in the official paperwork. Linda glanced at me, her smile tightening. "I'll let our account manager clarify that," she said smoothly. That was my opening. I took a slow breath, slid my laptop open, and projected the invoice Jake had accidentally copied me on. Then I pulled up the official version from the vendor's portal. Side by side, the differences were obvious: the stretched logo, the mismatched formatting, and my forged signature. The room went still. Marcus leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "So, which one of these am I supposed to trust?" And before anyone could speak, I noticed Jake's confident grin finally falter. The silence in the conference room felt like it lasted forever, but it was finally broken by Marcus. "This is a serious discrepancy," he said, voice measured but firm. "We need a clear explanation before any further payments." Linda's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw panic flicker in Jake's eyes. He stammered, trying to explain it as a simple clerical error, but the evidence was too clear. I calmly outlined the timeline: his late-night system logins, the copied signature on the fraudulent invoice, and the email trail showing he had intentionally misled both the client and our manager. Marcus listened quietly, nodding as I laid everything out. The tension was electric. Everyone in the room could feel the weight of what had just been revealed. Jake tried one last desperate move, claiming I was overreacting and misinterpreting the emails. But when I showed the metadata on the document files, even Linda had no choice but to face the facts. By the end of the meeting, it was undeniable: Jake had forged documents and manipulated the client, and Linda had been indirectly complicit, either through negligence or willful ignorance. Marcus thanked me for uncovering the truth before any real damage was done to their budget or trust. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but relieved. It wasn't over yet. There were still internal consequences to face, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like control was returning to my hands. By the next morning, word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. The office buzzed with quiet conversations, glances, and speculation. Some co-workers congratulated me in hushed tones, while others avoided eye contact, unsure whose side to take. Linda was summoned to HR for a review, leaving a noticeably tense silence in the management ranks. Jake, on the other hand, was suspended pending investigation. His usual bravado had vanished, replaced with nervous shuffling and desperate explanations to anyone who would listen. I spent the day organizing my own notes and evidence, just in case HR or upper management needed a full breakdown. It was exhausting, but necessary. The trust I had built with other colleagues seemed to strengthen. They now knew I wasn't just reacting to office drama, but actively protecting the integrity of our work and clients. Email circulated reminding everyone of proper procedures for approvals and vendor communications. Jake's actions became a case study in the office about the importance of transparency and accountability. I realized that although the personal drama was draining, it ultimately reminded the team why checks and balances exist. Even so, there were lingering questions. Could I have prevented this sooner? Would any blame still land on me by association? The tension hadn't fully dissipated, but at least the worst of the deceit had been exposed. And then, surprisingly, an unexpected ally stepped forward with a piece of information I hadn't anticipated. Just when I thought the dust was starting to settle, I received a private Slack message from someone I hadn't expected, Sarah, the coworker who had first warned me about the office whispers. "I've been tracking some internal logs for another project," she wrote. "I noticed Jake tried to access files he had no business touching. I saved copies if you need them." My heart skipped a beat. Sarah had been quietly gathering proof all along, without drawing attention to herself. I immediately realized that with her evidence combined with my own, we had a complete, irrefutable trail. We met in a quiet corner of the office that afternoon. She handed me a folder of screenshots, timestamps, and chat excerpts. It was meticulous work, enough to show beyond doubt that Jake had been manipulating invoices, email threads, and even project notes to frame me and take credit. Sarah didn't want recognition, she just wanted justice. But her timing couldn't have been better. With her support, I felt ready to face the final steps of holding both Jake and, indirectly, Linda accountable. As we walked back to our desks, a sinking feeling hit me. Linda might still try to defend herself or spin the story. The showdown wasn't over yet. And just when I thought I had everything lined up, the office phone rang with news that would change the endgame entirely. The phone call came from upper management. Linda had submitted a detailed report claiming she had been misled by Jake and that she had acted in good faith. At first, I felt a twinge of panic. Could her version undo all the evidence I had gathered? But then I remembered Sarah's folder and the metadata proving Jake's late-night manipulations. I calmly laid out the entire timeline in a follow-up meeting with HR and our regional director. Screenshots, timestamps, email chains, and forged invoices left no room for doubt. As we walked through the proof, Linda's defensiveness shifted. She realized that while she hadn't directly forged anything, her oversight allowed Jake to execute the scheme. HR made it clear, negligence and failure to verify approvals still carried consequences. Jake's suspension became permanent termination, and Linda received a formal reprimand with mandated compliance training. It was a stunning reversal. Jake had thought he could manipulate everyone and profit quietly, but the combination of careful observation, timing, and a trustworthy ally had flipped the situation completely. I finally felt a wave of relief wash over me. The client's account was secure, my reputation intact, and the office environment had been reset with a stronger focus on accountability. Yet, after weeks of tension, I knew the lessons I learned here were ones I wouldn't forget. Looking back, the whole ordeal taught me a lot about vigilance, trust, and speaking up at the right moment. I realized that even in a professional, seemingly orderly office, small manipulations can snowball into major problems if left unchecked. Having a reliable ally like Sarah was invaluable, and documenting everything carefully made all the difference. Jake's ambition and shortcuts could have destroyed my career, but evidence and timing leveled the playing field. Linda's oversight reminded me that authority doesn't replace accountability, and that clarity in procedures protects everyone. Most importantly, I learned that staying calm under pressure allows you to act strategically rather than react emotionally. It's one thing to notice a problem, it's another to collect the proof, plan your next move, and expose the truth decisively. By the end, justice was served. Jake was gone, Linda learned a hard lesson, and the client relationship remained intact. The office had a renewed respect for transparency, and I gained confidence in my own ability to navigate even the trickiest situations. Have you ever had to stand up in a situation where everyone else seemed to be on the wrong side? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear how you handled it.